I'm so excited to see you here. I legitimately love what we're going to talk about today. It's like, this is the perfect marriage of what I do and love best. So a little about me. I am from Ohio, and I've been in sexual violence advocacy and prevention since 2007, and started at a local rape crisis center, so doing local primary prevention work, expanding into state consortium work and state strategy stuff, which got me like really hooked and gassed about doing public health violence prevention. Like, how do we actually scale up to make the most impact with the little we have? And that eventually took me to the campus I'm at, Otterbein University. It is a small private university in central Ohio. And my role there is being project director for an Office of Violence Against Women grant. And the main point of that grant is to bring together a coordinated community response team. Does that ring bells? If we got people who came to campus stuff, there's going to be some campus and community people who CCRT. I say the T. I don't know if you do. There are some CCR teams people, and I don't do that. But that is actually the marriage of like, ooh, how do we get all the stakeholders together? Anybody who has any interest in reducing sexual violence, anybody who's working on shared risk factors that affect sexual violence, dating violence, and stalking. And how do we harmonize all the things that we're doing to make the most impact? Because at my school, everybody who is so awesome and works on my CCRT for reducing and responding to violence, they're doing it as like the third part of their job, right? So everybody is investing their whole heart, but nobody has a full FTE about it, right? And the CCRT work, though, for me this is the marriage of like, how do we do high impact stuff? And then the other side of how do we do this emotional, relational stuff? Because a CCRT actually functions as a community level activity. It is changing the social norms of that institution. It's working to institutionalize change that is more trauma informed, that would be getting at upstream protective factors, eliminating risk factors. And everybody on my team knows how to be a professional and get along with each other. But that is not the same as a CCRT whose members can have bold, frank conversations, have resilience within those relationships to muddle through things like what I'm investing my time and heart into might have a negative impact. Like, hearing that news is rough. And so anybody who does CCRT work, there's a lot of that relational component. And these are my sorry for that, interpreters. And I actually think, if you didn't realize this, but the data inventory tool that I would like to share today is actually very relational, if you didn't anticipate that. So I am sharing with you now, these are my objectives for today. So one, as advertised, I will go through talking about the data inventory tool, something to compile all the stuff we have on campus and put it to use. And I will share a little bit about why that's such a good idea, and why I think it's such a worthwhile use of our limited resources of time. I'm gonna walk through how I adapted it at Otterbein to meet the needs that we cared about. And then my other objective, surprise, is for you. I also hope that you will share, because I know that my experience on campus is not a one-to-one to yours. And I do believe that the idea of this tool is so useful and would be useful on any campus, but I don't have the application of all that. So I've built into our time spaces where, as I'm going through the tool and how I used it, that we're going to be able to think to ourselves for our independent, no-talking thinkers, and we're going to share with each other for our verbal processor thinkers. And hopefully in pairs and then as a group, come up with solution stuffs that are going to be giving at least one thing to everybody in here for how they could maybe expand their use and thoughts of data. So since I said we're going to be doing a lot of little application work, just as a foundation framework, I wanted to bring up that, yes, if you're doing prevention work, and if you're in this room, this is probably not a convincing slide, it's just a validation slide. But like, it's important that we use data to inform what we're doing. It's important. The CDC says so, you know, they matter. But I mean, most specifically in their, in the technical packages for sexual violence, domestic violence, right? So one of their pillars is that we be using data to inform our work and evaluate our work. And we do know, that was brought up over here, that our prevention, our outreach programming, like it matters, especially on campuses. We know that it's more effective for social norms change work that we want to be doing, hopefully in our outreach messaging. If those messages contain local data, if it's from that school. Even though we've got great national data that'll kick our butts in what we can accomplish on our campus for research, like it doesn't matter as much as a survey that is done with your students. And you can put that on something. So having, and actually even our best national resources tell us like, this is great, but you can't just plop that down and apply it to your school. There's another thing that I feel is important to say. There's this quotation from like the UN's Data Revolution report, if you remember reading that. But they had this line that was like, it's the data is the raw materials for accountability. It's like, it's the foundation for decision making, but it's the raw materials for accountability. And when I hear accountability, I translate that in my mind as transparency, which is a fundamental of trauma-informed care. And everything that we're doing should be imbued with trauma-informed care. So I feel like it's also connecting to my values and the values of our CCRT, that it is a values-driven decision that we take care to listen to the information that we have on our campus, and that we have the care and resources invested in being transparent about what work we're doing and sharing that out. All right, so what is a data inventory tool? It's a lot of my words on here feel like they're exaggerating, like what's going on. Data inventory, it's an audit, it's a list that with some details about the data sources. Hand in hand, right? I want to be high impact with minimal resources, and I want it to be in the hands of as many people as possible. This is, if I should have said it sooner, this is so for everybody at whatever level you feel like you're at. If you're a super fancy data person, then you could make this way cooler, and you should do that. And if you're not, you can use the Excel sheet that I used. Okay, so the data inventory tool is just a centralized document. It's a one-stop place where you can organize all the information, any data that would be from whether it's a population level campus-wide climate survey, or if it's a programmatic evaluation, right? What is the information that you have on your campus that would at all be relevant to the stakeholders talking about preventing and responding to sexual violence? The part that it's good for, one, you would then have a place where everything that you could possibly know that you've already collected, other people did that, right? You might have a tool on there, but other people did this. You have it all in one place, because if you are a person on campus who works with sexual violence prevention, as many people in here might be, then you might be familiar with the faculty member, staff member, board member, cabinet member, student coming in being all like, I'm going to do this research survey, I want to do a survey on, and then they list you stuff that you already have a survey about. Happened to me. That was a personal example from my life. So that happens often. And it's a lack of us being able to take what we invest our time and resources into doing these surveys, and then maybe it gets a write-up, maybe it goes to cabinet, but then it sits there and it doesn't come to life for any use. So the point of it is to have a centralized document for that. You can then compare the data, whether it's from what's the information on a campus-wide survey versus what is the information on a program evaluation. That is certainly not applicable to scale up to your whole campus. But you can look at these two in comparison to each other, right? You can synthesize your concepts. And the point I know that I said the phrase data triangulation in my write-up of this session. And that is true. We do data triangulation. But that just means you put it on a big chart and then you look at it. And you're like, we don't have anything here. No yeses. And that tells you you have a gap. It's just you getting together with your people and looking at it. And then third component, I'm pointing to this table who said, I want to apply it for my prevention and outreach. And you're like, yeah. And then you say, what do we want to use? Use this then. Now this tool was adapted. I first put this together in 2021. And so I used the beginning of it from the sexual violence data triangulation. That's why I say that word. It's because it was a part of the pilot tool that I used. So it was a pilot tool, but now in 2023, it's like a whole tool. It's all ready now. So this doesn't have my weird stuff that I did at Otterbein on it, but you might not want that. This is the whole cool thing with Drs. Mahoney and Decker. They did it with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Johns Hopkins University, their public health school. And so this is a really nice tool. If you haven't seen it yet, snag it. Patricia Mahoney invites you to email her if you want to get their data triangulation tool. It's the first two slides, first two sheets of what I'm sharing with you today. And it's actually, this is just one part. It's like a gaps analysis. It's one part of a whole look that they have on environmental and situational prevention strategies. It's really cool. It's a read and super useful information all through it. So definitely hit that up. But that's where it came from. And then it grew up to be a mighty oak and is now a full toolkit and not just the pilot that I started with. That makes it sound like I worked on this. I didn't. I was off at Otterbein fiddling with my data inventory. Does everybody get a picture of that wanted? I feel like you can also email me later for this whole jam, but we'll pause there. So next, once I see phones are down, everybody's satisfied, we're going to move on to the policy environment of our campuses. And I know one of the objectives that was stated is I want to know what other data sources people are using. And no matter who you are or how familiar you are with the data sources on your campus, you have some. Like right off the bat, you have an annual security report, right? You have your crime and fire log, which is a different source. And then you have your aggregate Clery annual security report. So not only are federal statutes, like we have that, and also VAWA. It's important to know that in 2013, we added VAWA, or sexual violence, and DVSAS, the domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Added that to it. But you also would have potentially other local information. So for me in Ohio, like we tacked on 2021 is Collins Law. It's an anti-hazing law. It's not sexual violence, but a lot of hazing might be sexual in nature. They have a lot of overlapping protective and risk factors, and they do prevention education and have other campaigns. So I definitely want to connect with anything that is being required from them with Collins Law, any reporting they might have. That's a hint for me. So this is part of the go get the low-hanging fruit of the stuff that's true in your state. In 2015 is when the Office of the Vice President was like, it's a good idea to have a climate survey. They didn't say everybody has to, but that's when that recommendation came out. 2016, Ohio was like, we can't force you to, but we'll incentivize with some grants the Ohio Department of Higher Ed if you do have a climate survey. They actually instituted a survey for everyone to use in Ohio. They want you to use theirs. So Does your state do that? Like, you might have some incentives there as well. And everything, I put FERPA on there too, because there's more in our policy landscape that influences our space on campus. So now let's move back to our groups. This is where maybe you do want to be in a larger group, who knows? But stick with your pair for now. The first part of this is I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I'll tell you when that expires, for you just to jot down on your own what's some of the low-hanging fruit that you know of your context, of your campus context, right? If you're not on a campus, I didn't prepare for that. So if you jot that down, I'll give you 2 minutes for that, and then I'll tell you when we're going to start discussing in pairs, and then we'll just feast on all the good ideas. So we have some of our big policy ones. We know we have a Clery annual security report. But what are the other things on campus that you think would be interesting or needed by you, or hopefully the team of people working with you? Does that instruction sound clear? We'll write for 2 minutes, trying to write as many evaluations, survey tools that we think would be on our campus, and that'll bring us together. Even if you didn't share everything, now is our time we could. So we have one of the objectives of, like, I want to hear everything that people thought of. Like, did anybody get into some nooks and crannies? If you raise your hand first, you get to say the easy ones. Did anyone think of one? Great. Let's wait for a mic and we'll hear from you up front. No, it's a recording and disability issue. Thank you, and interpreting.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So I think we did this right. So we were thinking about data collection or data points that universities already have. So
exactly.
It's not recreating things. So campus crime data, the climate surveys. Our Board of Regents in Louisiana does an annual report. So being able to look at that and connect it with—
What's on that?
So the amount of disclosures, the amount of sexual assaults that happened on campus, stuff like that. And you can also see where the cases are within the process. So like, did it get dropped off? Did it make it this far? You know, has there been some type of mediation? You can see stuff like that. And partnering with mental health services to see any data they may have. Stuff that they don't have to recreate or redo.
Counseling services on campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right on. I love that list. Who's got some of that and something else? Did anyone have something in addition to that? Table over here, thanks.
I think, if I speak on behalf of our 2-person group, we had information from Title IX. If your advocacy office has separate data, the police department with the crime stats or public safety office. Vector Solutions has a survey data. They collect information post sexual violence education that's required.
Yeah, like mandatory orientation, first-year student. Yep. Vector.
Campus organizations, the admissions office, student affairs.
What would you be getting from the admission office?
Demographic.
Love it.
Data. And maybe like first-year students, you know, what ages and areas of academics, maybe. And then I think, we just talked about student affairs. Dean of Students or conduct office would also keep data stats. And then we had a question, or we asked there was a rumor that the VAWA is going to come out with a requirement on publishing annual sexual violence.
I'm glad you came to me with this. I don't know. That's interesting. No, I don't know anything. That's interesting.
So I mentioned we had discussed if VAWA was going to come out with a requirement for an annual report. There was just a rumor. We were talking about that. It would be very helpful to compile. This is what we're talking about, in fact.
Yeah, I think it would be really great to receive all of that and not to do any of it. As with most things. Lazy Girl's Guide to a Data Inventory. Yes, and over here, please. Other ideas? What else you got?
I feel like maybe this was mentioned under the guise of climate surveys, but the NCHA, National College Health Association survey is great. If you aren't partnering with your campus health center on that, they will allow for you to add some questions in. Not a whole lot, but you can get some questions specifically related to sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking on that. And they do that every 2 years. And then you don't have to do that much, which is great.
It's a great ad. Got another hand.
I work with a online reporting platform for sexual violence on campus, and we track things like FAQ clicks, where people are looking at what is my school sexual violence policy, where can I access a forensic exam, where can I go? So we're looking at kind of the information that survivors or people who've experienced harm are looking at to inform and give that back to their institutions, as well as anonymous data. We also have a space where users can create a record, but maybe haven't reported yet. So an institution might have 50 records sitting that a survivor has yet to report. So there's lots of different data that's available in those nooks and crannies.
Yeah. Are you with YHOP?
It's called REES.
Oh, what is it?
REES, Respect.
Can you give the microphone so I can hear them? Thank you.
It's called REES. It's Respect, Educate, Empower Survivors.
Cool. Thank you for that. I'm learning so much. Vawa's going to make Amanda. No, anyway, other things that people. Does anyone have something that hasn't been said yet? Yeah, give it. Love it.
So some of the I work at a coalition and I work with preventionists on campus, and some of them partner with Partners in Prevention. We have a Missouri Partners in Prevention, but then it's larger than that. And they use the Partners in Prevention data. There's a survey that Partners in Prevention requires, and they use that to really inform a lot of their programming.
Very cool. I love that. Well, let's keep going. We'll add to this. I'm going to keep taking us along our data inventory journey. I do have one brief Ina Garten moment, which is if something was mentioned that sounded like a cool piece of information that your campus does not have and won't have the capacity to have, as Ina Garten, the Food Network chef lady, who's always like in the Hamptons being all like, store-bought is fine. And it's like, if there is a barrier to you convincing one of your administrators or a cabinet member about why you should serve a population or do something with a particular population on your campus that you know is disproportionately affected everywhere they are, go ahead and use some national data. Store-bought is fine. Don't let that be the barrier for you. All right? We want to use what we have on our campus because that is good to use and it was already expended resources on, but don't ever let your institution's research capacity be a barrier for you doing what you know is probably true on your campus, even if you don't have those numbers. So, in the data inventory tool, I have 4 categories. These are Excel sheets. Okay, so the first one, the data sources. That's just the inventory, the audit list, the index of each, whether it's a climate survey, whether it was the annual security report, and then the information on that. I'm going to show you what this looks like for each of them afterwards. So you'll see it laid out empty and laid out with my first filling of it. The second one, relevant data elements. So because this was sourced from the toolkit on environmental and situational prevention strategies, it had a lot of attention on geography, like incidents, reports, perpetration stuff. So there's a big long list of the information, and then we at Otterbein, I'll show you what we ended up adding because we cared about other things and had more information on that. The third one, relevant data elements. So because this was sourced from the toolkit on environmental and situational prevention strategies, it had a lot of attention on geography, like incidents, reports, perpetration stuff. So there's a big long list of the information, and then we at Otterbein, I'll show you what we ended up adding because we cared about other things and had more information on that. The third one I made up because we had an interest in my stakeholders on our CCRT for like, we don't have enough time. We want to be measuring what we're doing, but if we come in and do a program, what should my evaluation be? I don't even know that I have time to make it up. Or, if people make up survey evaluation tools that are just kind of like, And it's like, well, why don't we make the most of this and pull out literally individual questions from the surveys that we think could have further use in other areas on campus. So that only happened with a couple of surveys, and you'll see that. And the fourth one, data elements not summarized, are all the pieces of information I found that aren't summarized anywhere. There is no report on them. It's just stuff that happens and is counted somehow, but just doesn't get connected. And it doesn't have to be, but there needed to be a place to write in what we learned, right? So I'll show you these images and then I'll talk you through how I got there. So here's data sources, right? So data source 1 would be Campus Climate Survey on Sexual Violence. That is owned by my institution or my institutional research department. And I would go ask Sean for that. And then you write like, who all gets included in that? Is it all students? Yes. It's all undergraduate and graduate students? Yes. The timing and frequency, we only do it every 3 years. We have 3 campus climate surveys that we alternate back and forth. So what year that was done, and then the number of cases reviewed by your data inventory team, which was just me. And then at the end there, the risk does this survey tool include questions that get at the respondents' risk perception, and does it have survey questions about actual incidents? Because on campus, these are 2 very different questions, right? Do students feel safe? Is bad stuff happening, right? We're still battling the risk perception of parking garage that does not correlate to an incidence of violence in parking garages, right? So it does matter where our community members feel safe, but that is not the same as targeting for incidents, right? So those are those things. You could add whatever you wanted. The second page just takes every data source I wrote, it just self-populates, puts it up on the first row. And then I just showed you the first 6 or so, but this has like 58 elements. So 58 questions, because at Otterbein, we actually also wanted a lot of demographic information. Because we want to make sure like, are our services being received or accessed by a representative amount of our students or not, right? So we ended up adding data sources that have nothing to do with sexual violence, just our demographic information, like the common data set, right? Your campus probably does that. Almost all of them do. So that's just the who came in. It would be probably what you would get from your admissions people. First year students, how many got a Pell Grant, which can be an indicator for economic situation of upbringing. Lots of information on there. The third sheet, this is an example of how we would put in like the first column, the item. I would just write the survey question and then the response options of that survey question, so that if somebody wanted to go cheat their way to a bystander intervention eval, they could just use, and this is not going to be published and it's not rigorous. It's just, if you wanted to make a bystander intervention evaluation, these things are already being asked. You could use those questions. Or like we just did, they were like, we want to do an outreach poster campaign. And I was like, cool, cool, cool. Let me open up the data inventory and I will filter the yeses on bystander values. And here are all the questions. Like I can send you to these responses from the 2021 survey. And that's the information on bystanders and the norms that we have on our campus. And we can send that to the team who's working on that to pick the information that they want. And it was a 5-minute ordeal, right? To immediately apply the questions and responses that would be relevant, but not pouring through the whole survey when that question came. So lastly, we have the data elements not summarized. Oh, I suppose I should have lingered here for a second. I populated this with the things that we cared about. They were the questions that our stakeholders were already interested in, like bystander values, anything relating to that, anything about who got prevention education, because some of our questions are just like, did you get it? Did you remember getting it? Was it good? Like one tool has a good. And then for us also, are there any indicators that we have floating around on any of these survey tools that could give us a hint that we are tracking a community level risk or protective factor? Because we will never have money to do like a program evaluation of like a legit scale. We will not have $200,000 in an eval team to do that. So, but we do need to care about that. And can we get good enough to track our work and not let like perfect be the enemy of good? So data elements not summarized. This is what happened because I picked all the low-hanging fruit of those surveys, and then I went in and did an interview process. And I interviewed all of our stakeholders that I thought could know anything. And during those interviews, I learned a lot of stuff that wasn't surveys necessarily, and that needed a place to live. So it was really just the notes from that, and this became the sort of raw materials that we could use to talk about our opportunities, what we could be doing. So methods go like this. I wrote down all the ones I could think of. Then I went and I conducted interviews. I interviewed people from these departments or these positions. The director of our institutional research knows all of the Big Daddy surveys that are being done. I went to our Dean of Students, Title IX coordinator, our police department. The Women, Gender, Sexuality Resource Center is sexual health and violence. They are professionally trained peer advocates and peer facilitators for some of our prevention. Director of Counseling Services, our confidential resources like counseling, chaplain. And then we have specific prevention for just athletes, went to their evaluation. And the Center for Student Involvement, so Greek life, all clubs, orientation, and the Director of Residence Life. So went to them, did interviews, went back, found the stuff, then went back to them and did more interviews, found more stuff. There were people that I seriously didn't get information from until the third interview. And then something cracked open, and I think it was because of a underestimation about what would count, but anything that's here that you're already marking somewhere, that's already work put in that we should translate, right? We should translate that into being powerful or shared with others. And can I make it easier for you to just give me that or us to get that and put it into the hands of our whole CCRT? And then, once it's all there, you look at it. And then you look at it together. And then you decide, wow, there's about 50 things we could do. And we're not going to do 50 things. So what are the top 3 that we're going to do? So in total, my sheet number 1 data sources had 9 distinct data sources that I thought were useful. Interviewed 12 people, some of them multiple times. And here's what the results look like. Not fancy, it's an Excel sheet. So we have our top 3 are our campus climate surveys. I started with the ones that were population level, my goodest. And you can see there, done every 3 years where it's done. In the description, I also put in what's the response rate, which also immediately was useful when Cabinet wanted to know how our campaign and the investment in our campaign to do the climate survey, if that was a useful thing that we invested in, doing a campaign to promote that survey. And it was. We increased our respondent rate by 6%. So, and that was really easy to know because it was just in this spreadsheet. But it also helped us get more information. So this is what it looks like. Sorry for singing. Okay. Relevant data elements. This is what it looks like. I put little yeses. Sometimes I put no's, and then you see where I stopped because that was I'm not going to do that anymore. Because this is a 58. I was like, I think the yeses are more helpful. I didn't go back in and erase those no's, not even for you. But that's how you can see, like, quickly. You can use the filter function through all of them, or when you were looking at it for the first time, just see where the gaps are. Or it's like, ooh, we have 3 different surveys that talk about this. If we put that together, what is that richness telling us? It's just an opportunity. You are not going to like minutely go through and compare every survey result like that. The whole point of that is we don't got time for that. But it's mapping it out so we know where we have maybe really important gaps that need fixed, or where we just have a duplication and we can chill out and put stuff elsewhere, right? So individual questions look like that. Like that's a question on a survey, and those are the options. They had bystander values as a part of it. So this goes on and on and on. You're only seeing the top part of it. But that's what this is. And this is a sheet. This is the one from the climate survey on sexual violence. And it had a lot. And then the climate survey sheet for diversity and inclusion had a couple components, right? It had some campus like norms questions that were relevant. Inclusive and belonging campus survey that had, I believe that the faculty and staff would care if I reported something, like those sorts of item questions. They're relevant to us. That's an overall culture that would matter for sexual violence response and prevention programming. So putting those on there. And then lastly, the interview results stuff that was going to go into the 4th category. So I had said that there was some stuff that didn't get revealed till later. The interview part, like I said, I went multiple times. I don't know that I could fix it to not go multiple times. I think coming back again for some people that just had a lot of meat, a lot of interaction with domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking on campus, I think that the repeated time with them helped them to loosen up and say, oh, well, actually, one of the examples, actually, yes, I do write up an aggregate story of all of the Title IX complaints, but there isn't an official Title IX incident report that happens on my campus. But I would give that to the VP. And you're like, well, that would count. I would love that. And then we could work with that. We could track that over time. Like, that's wonderful. Another example that happened from this, like in ResLife, it wasn't a data source, but ResLife has like these little memos that they pass. I don't know if y'all do that. Like the little like, hey, Sue's had 3 grandparents die. So like, heads up on Sue's sadness, or, just sort of informal check-in. I know things are going on in this person's life, maybe check in. There's been a drastic change in their demeanor. Anybody else see that? Is there a sort of group for that? And so there are these memos that were happening, and you're like, that's not a data source. It could be one if we felt like it, and we had these applications of, well, potentially if we knew that something was going on that was dating violence or stalking, we could use those to like reverse engineer maybe early warning signs that are evident to RAs. I don't know, like it's just where you make up stuff of, there's this thing that exists. Could that be useful somehow because it already exists? And you dream that up and you put it in a chart. And then when you get together with your people, you're like, does that sound hot to you? Like, do we like it? Like, or no. We also have like the silence witness log, which could be improved. And it's just like an anonymous form where students write in potential crimes that aren't, but that exists. What do we want to do with that? Get rid of it. And then like the internal reports for Title IX, like that element came out of it. But maybe most importantly, what we saw were gaps. And the gaps were when I went to our confidential resources on campus, I found out that we do not have any utilization records. So we're not doing any record keeping of how many students utilize campus advocacy or our chaplain services. The counseling department, we had an entire infrastructure collapse right before COVID. So everything is gone from January 2020. And so since then, we haven't recouped that sort of infrastructure to do an aggregate thing. So our counseling people were like, sounds cool. I could have done that in 2019 with you, but that's just off the table. So it's giving, these interviews gave me insights into, one, the resource limitations that people were really facing and what was valuable to them. I was hearing what their jobs were, where things got collected ever for me to think about, and also just their limits of what they could do. And when I talked to the confidential services about utilization records, like how can we start keeping this and like know who we're serving or reflect to the campus and the cabinet that like we're crucial here, that I found out it wasn't that's not that thought never occurred to them, but that it was out of concern for confidentiality of the students. And so they were so afraid of subpoena or losing or betraying confidentiality by keeping any record that they kept nothing. And it's like, well, that's a really important value and barrier. Like they were really holding something up for the students in their integrity for that. And just knowing that we don't have utilization records, that doesn't tell me the real problem and the real need of the people I'm working with and what solutions we need to figure out. So I promised you data inventory is very relational. It was a lot of really important conversations that happened with that. So, as I said, this is what it looks like afterwards, where I would come in after interviews, I would tighten up my notes and try to do something succinct that could be shared with the whole team. And noticing where our gaps were and what the opportunities were. One of the results that the interviews revealed more sort of the big 9 data sources that I entered, but also how much it built relationally with all of my stakeholders. One, my value and support of them in their work, but also bringing them into seeing some of the value of doing evaluation work or monitoring their own work, about how it could, promote their work, help them see the impact that they're having, which when people are just nose to the grindstone all the time, don't get to sit back and reflect at how important or substantial the work they're doing is. And that's what we can give to our stakeholders. It also meant that my CCRT was now a group of people that understood how evaluation could not just be a resource time suck that goes nowhere, but that how evaluation or our survey tools or their monitoring would actually be of benefit to them. And I feel like that did a giant thing for us as a group, that I spent that time connecting with them about their work, but also bringing them in to see some of their emotional values connection to the work that they're doing too. Finding the significance of the gaps I talked about with the utilization reports, which we found other ways to get aggregate information in and still share that out. And also like data triangulation, when I use the survey tools to look at the topics of bystander intervention or community risk factors, we can now see how many items that we actually have concrete information on for our whole population about those topics. This is my penultimate, this is our nearly sum up, but I just think that if you spent 1 week doing this, you would reap results. Like the smallest investment in doing this, I think immediately would reap results to whatever extent you perform it, to however many people you interview or how many surveys that you pull apart and do the relevant data elements, whatever. Immediately, we found that it helps us reflect our program reach or affect our program reach for who we should be talking to on campus. Our Title IX reports showing us what we had anecdotally, but we knew that we actually do have academic departments on campus that need targeted support. We need prevention activities for particular departments. And I could give that information to those departments when that came. And it was no surprise to them because they're living it. But it's like, this is why we're giving more attention to you. That it also made more of our resources. Like I said, I found not only gaps, but I found spaces where we're doing things a slow way, a really costly way. And we don't want that information and we don't have to do it that way. So saving your people time, like it's amazing. And not only that, just putting to use, if you have somebody in institutional research, they know how much information they're just sitting on that no one ever comes and asks about, that just never goes anywhere. So you're actually making more stretching dollars because you're putting to use the things that are already happening on your campus. And maybe my favorite and what I've seen the dividends from is the relational impact of just how it engaged my CCRT partners. That now everybody understands more fully about why we would use information, why we would use this data, how we would use it, how we used it to see the campus climate increase, how we used it for the prevention posters. And one quick example I'll give at the end, one of the activities that we had said at the beginning is that we wanted our CCRT to be representative of campus. And that's cool, but that's just saying something unless you're showing it. And so I was like, well, we can't be representative of campus if we don't measure us in comparison to campus. And that could be a giant deal. It could be a giant survey, but it wasn't. It was a Google form. It was a Google form where I was like, well, what are the demographics? We're only going to ask questions that we have answers to. I'm going to ask that question. And then I had a couple sneak in that we didn't have answers to, but I just know from other research are incredibly relevant, so I'm putting them in. Okay. So we did those. And at Otterbein, we had our common data set would answer some of this. And then we had our campus climate survey for diversity and equity. And so I was like, I'm going to use these components. And it's an Excel spreadsheet. So it wasn't fancy. It was like this. And if that feels intense to you, it's copy paste and then a COUNTIF formula that a very helpful YouTube video will tell you what to do for that. And then it will make this graph. And then you're done. Like I cannot, like Lazy Girl's Guide to doing this. Immediately I could give answers to my CCRT, take this survey, we'll do this. I did not intersectionally weave the 14, or no, more than that, identity demographic things together, because that's so much, and that's not what we do, right? That's not what people were interested in looking at the results of. That's not what I was interested in tabulating. So I was using what was easiest, the survey tools that made it easy. This is what happens when you do a Google form. It looks like that, right? That actually is not super great for equity and data visualization. So you could take 2 more COUNTIF steps and do it like that if you wanted, right? But all of these were just, this is what we have. And it's like, I'm not beating myself up about the relevancy of the 2 different data sources. There's benefits of the census results of the common set. And then there was information on neurotypical and neurodivergence that mattered to our CCRT members. And so we included that, even though that information wasn't as robust, or rigorous rather. Doing your racial demographics all separately so as to not entice bias is a good idea. So that's why I have lots of graphs instead of one big graph. But yeah, all of that was just, let me pull this from the data inventory that already exists. And now we have an annual tool that is just us, we're just tracking it. It's going to tell us where we should recruit more for CCRT, or maybe we shouldn't recruit more. Maybe that just means we need to set up separate ways where we connect with these populations, because not everybody is supposed to be sitting in a CCRT meeting. That's not right for all populations. Not like in a not welcome way, but it's like, don't bug them with that. Go to them and figure out their input. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that was the last slide. This is it. Well, not the last slide. We have another question, which is going to be about how we would use this, but tell me your thing.
Okay. Well, this is in relation to what you just said about how to present your data.
Oh, snap, right?
So for me, collecting data along with updating our information and technology is just at the bottom of my priority list.
Word.
As a victim advocate, I work at Marquette University in Milwaukee. And there's just so much to do, not enough time, and only me. So how did you start navigating your data collection in like how to pilot. I can do an Excel sheet. I'm not well versed in it. But did you have other resources on campus who were assisting you, or even grad students? Like what do you recommend on where to start and how to best like utilize your time? Because again, I'm a victim advocate and I'm doing everything for everything else.
So there was lots of stuff. And when you put it all together and you talk about it with people, they're like, I wonder how many commuter students from first generation families like also used counseling services. And I was like, I will never be, there isn't a chart for that. We didn't do that. That is a lot of things. Like, and I might be compelled to go find that out if you tell me what you're going to use it for. And if you can't, then I'm not. Which isn't me talking. That was literally the head of my institutional research who was like, I can't do everything with that. So one, I'm not a full-time advocate on campus. I am in charge of the supervision of the larger strategies for prevention and response. And this data inventory was part of our like 3-year strategic plan. So it was like, we all agreed, I will be investing time to do this. But it was as simple and low key as I'm trying to make it sound. Like it was an Excel spreadsheet that I got from that data pilot tool. Then I made some more columns. But also, yeah, always being careful that don't invest more time in something that's going nowhere. Like only keep it if it matters to you, which is what was happening in the interviews. Like what information matters to you? What do you think is important to know or that you would like to see over time? And just, yeah, reining it in to be like, what's your just, the guidance is what you're already in tune with, which is what is worth it for me to invest any of this in? And you know what? And you're allowed to be like, listen, I will just use the Google form chart and not muss with count if features because people need to just get at it. And then you put it to use, like, because this was for this, and this was also for 2 separate meetings. Like we had different applications that people wanted. And later our diversity, inclusion, and belonging wanted to do a strategy plan and was like, you know, looking for other parts of this data or these sorts of questions. I was like, I have them in my treasure pile of questions right here. So there were other people that had it of interest as well for me to do some of this. But I think institutionalizing it as like the whole group agrees that this matters because it's going to inform tons of our other work was a big part of why I was allowed to spend time doing it. Because everybody had a long-term vision for how this could continually be useful.